Hey everyone, it's Saoirse. I'm sorry I took so long to come back again, but I've been working on this room actually. I'm really excited to have a different location to show you. This is my window seat. I'm so happy with it. Been working on designing and building it for a little bit, and I am so happy with how it turned out. I actually don't have enough books to fill the two bookcases, so gonna have to remedy that somehow. Now, I've also been kind of reading the same book for a little while, and that book is the one we're talking about today, which is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This was published in 1938, and let me just tell you right away, there are going to be spoilers. There are going to be spoilers right off the top. I think we kind of have to talk spoilers in order to get into this book. So, I'll read you the back. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. With these words, the reader is ushered into an isolated grey stone mansion on the windswept Cornish coast, as the second Mrs. Maxim de Winter recalls the chilling events that transpired as she began her new life as the young bride of a husband she barely knew. For in every corner of every room were phantoms of a time dead but not forgotten, a past devotedly preserved by the sinister housekeeper Mrs. Danvers, a suite immaculate and untouched, clothing laid out and ready to be worn, but not by any of the great house's current occupants. With an eerie presentiment of evil tightening her heart, the second Mrs. de Winter walked in the shadow of her mysterious predecessor, determined to uncover the darkest secrets and shattering truths about Maxim's first wife, the late and hauntingly beautiful Rebecca. Okay, let's dig into it. So, first of all, anybody notice that this book is very similar to Jane Eyre? I've seen it called a retelling. I wouldn't go quite that far, but it did strike me at the beginning. Young girl, older man, big house, weird secrets about an ex-wife or a dead wife or something. Yeah, this is much more horrifying, I think, in the way that it's written. Jane Eyre, to me, is more of a romance. This says the classic tale of romantic suspense. By the way, I do not like this cover. I wish I'd gotten one of the many prettier covers. Romantic suspense. So this book is interesting in that there is a sense of suspense throughout it, and yet it feels like nothing happens. I loved it. I really did enjoy this book, but it took me a while to read because there were long breaks between the suspenseful scenes where we're just watching the main character try to settle into life at Manderley, which can get a little bit monotonous, like living in a fancy estate somewhere in England and you have servants doing everything for you. You kind of just like sit around writing letters and gardening and walking on the beach, I guess. So yeah, not a whole lot seems to happen, but it's almost 400 pages. And I liked it, and it's really beautifully written and poetic. But anyway, the similarities to Jane Eyre. Interestingly, Jane Eyre is named after the main character. She's the heroine of the story. This book is named after the villain. Okay? And our main character, our narrator, first-person narrator, never gets a name in this book. I find that fascinating. And du Maurier says in this author's note at the end that there's no reason why. She says that she just couldn't think of a name. Yeah, I could not think of one. It became a challenge in technique the easier because I was writing in the first person. Sometimes it's a little disappointing to hear why an author did certain things because, you know, as a literature major, I like to dig in and analyze every single word. And as a writer, that's how I like to write, is for everything to be intentional. So her not having a name, to me, this makes her an unreliable narrator. Love it. She's invisible in her own story. She gets covered up by the ghost of Rebecca. She's overshadowed. Okay, so you are constantly hearing about Rebecca, 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 and never ever get a name for a narrator, and it almost doesn't even strike us as strange. You know, she is just called Mrs. de Winter. but so is Rebecca. Rebecca is always referred to, especially by Mrs. Danvers, as Mrs. De Winter, as if she's still alive and still married to Maxim. It's very creepy. Okay, also, I hated Maxim. He sucks. Plain and simple. He really, I think, takes advantage of an inexperienced, much younger woman who desperately wants to get out of her job. She's a companion for a horrible woman who is going to take her away to America, and she doesn't want to go. She's just falling for this guy. And so he, after only a few weeks of knowing her, proposes and doesn't say I love you, doesn't say anything like that, but marry me and come to Manderley. Even though I haven't told you anything about my weird, creepy past. And then he proceeds to, for months, leave her in the dark about everything that happened with Rebecca and why everyone's so obsessed with her and why he cannot talk about anything. So she's just totally alone, and it makes sense that her brain is spiraling, like, who am I and what am I doing here, and does anybody even want me here? And, like, do I matter at all when clearly this previous wife is the one that made such an impact here, and she's the one that people want around. So, yes, did not like Maxim. I was convinced until Maxim's confession, and that is getting close to the end. Until then, I was sure that she was going to end up with Frank, the land agent. Did anybody else feel that? I don't know what it was. It just seemed like they got on really well because she kept describing herself as boring and dull, and Frank was kind of boring and dull and normal. And they seemed to get on really well, and in the beginning when she talks about, I'm looking back now, like, we'll never go back to Manderley, I thought, uh-oh, catfight. I thought the we that she's referring to could be her and Frank, because she doesn't mention Maxim's name in that first chapter. I was wrong, sadly. I really still want her to be with Frank because, God, Maxim is awful. Just like a gaslighting, manipulative weirdo who couldn't stand to be alone. Anyway, the main character, she hides most of her background. Her obsession becomes her focus. Okay, so her character is really tied to this obsession with Maxim and with understanding Rebecca. So she doesn't really get to have a personality outside of that. Like, I completely forgot that she liked to sketch. It doesn't stay a big thing in the book for a reason. Because she lets all of the good, normal things about her personality, the things that meant something to her before, those slip away as she becomes consumed by this obsession. And then her imagination is extremely vivid. She's always picturing scenarios that haven't happened and will never happen. And this I found very, very interesting and relatable. The way that she spirals in her head and comes up with entire scenarios that don't exist. Just because she's like waiting for something anxiously, and she's like, what if it's this is the reason this is happening, and then that becomes very real to her. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Let's get into some of the quotes and themes in here, things that stood out to me. I sighed and turned away from the window. The sun was so full of promise, and the sea was whipped white with a merry wind. I thought of that corner in Monaco, which I had passed a day or two ago, and where a crooked house lent to a cobbled square. High up in the tumbled roof there was a window, narrow as a slit. It might have held a presence medieval, and reaching to the desk for pencil and paper, I sketched in fancy with an absent mind a profile, pale and aquiline. So, even her hobbies, such as sketching, become about Maxim. She can't even have that for herself because she's starting to sketch Maxim. And previously she would have just been in this place enjoying sketching and being alone, and now she's taken over by this. Okay. I looked at him over my glass of citronade. It was not easy to explain my father, and usually I never talked about him. He was my secret property, preserved for me alone, much as Manderley was preserved for my neighbor. I had no wish to introduce him casually over a table in a Monte Carlo restaurant. So, the main character has these secrets. She's pretty mysterious, and yet she's obsessed with this mystery of Rebecca. We never really get to know that much about her, which is very interesting for a book that is this long and a book that's in first person. I really need to read Jane Eyre again because it has been years and years. Okay, so she has this obsession with memory. I wanted to go back again, to recapture the moment that had gone, and then it came to me that if we did, it would not be the same. Even the sun would be changed in the sky, casting another shadow, and the peasant girl would trudge past us along the road in a different way, not waving this time, perhaps not even seeing us. There was something chilling in the thought, something a little melancholy, and looking at the clock I saw that 5 more minutes had gone by. Soon we would have reached our time limit and must return to the hotel. So she talks about this desire to bottle a memory, a moment, and be able to return to it. And she's got this preoccupation with time, with little snippets of moments, and whether she's experiencing them the same way that somebody else is. So she's aware that Maxim is probably not experiencing their romance unfolding in the same way that she is, and she worries that his memories of Rebecca are so strong that they can't form new memories together, if that makes sense. I have like 9,000 things I could say. I don't want to ramble too much. Okay, red flags. Okay, here we go. This is after he proposes to her. I was seized with a sudden desire to laugh, to cry, to do both, and I had a pain too at the pit of my stomach. I wished for one wild moment that none of this had happened, that I was alone somewhere going for a walk and whistling. And then later it was foolish to go on having that pain in the pit of my stomach when I was so happy. Nerves, of course. Waiting like this, the doctor's anteroom. It would have been better, after all, more natural surely, to have gone into the sitting room hand in hand, laughing, smiling at one another, and for him to say, "We're going to be married, we're very much in love." In love. He had not said anything yet about being in love. Okay, so red flags. Red flags. What is his motive here? What's this guy doing? Like, basically scooping up, kidnapping this girl to take her back to his creepy mansion. When you feel this strong desire that you're doing the wrong thing and you want to be alone, maybe you should listen to that. For some people, it is just a quick reaction that they have because they're afraid of commitment or they've been hurt in the past and whatever. I get it. But yeah, I don't know. As a single person, I think I'd rather remain single if my brain is telling me you really don't want to do this. Like, trust me, you don't want to do this. I'd rather be alone than just ignore all the red flags. Okay, now this was interesting. I followed this line of what I thought was religious symbolism for a little bit, and then it kind of disappeared, or maybe I wasn't paying attention. But there's a few lines here. It was an ancient mossy smell, the smell of a silent church where services are seldom held, where rusty lichen grows upon the stones and ivy tendrils creep to the very windows, a room for peace, a room for meditation. How vast the great hall looked now that it was empty. My feet rang on the flagged stones, echoing to the ceiling, and I felt guilty at the sound, as one does in church, self-conscious, aware of the same constraint. One more. There used to be tremendous parties. Yes, I would say. Yes, so I have heard. A further pause, and then the lowered voice that is always used about the dead or in a place of worship. She was so tremendously popular, you know. Such a personality. Okay, so talking about Rebecca, using this voice that you save for the dead or in a place of worship, and then feeling like when she's in Manderley it's like a church, and she's making these mistakes that you would make in church, and you're supposed to be quiet and meditative. Whoa. I thought maybe, not at the time because I didn't know the twist, but later on I thought maybe there is something there with Rebecca being like the devil, almost. Stick with me. And our main character having to come and redeem this place from the evil that has existed there. I don't know. I thought there was something there. But yeah, I didn't get too deep into it because it felt like the church references kind of disappeared after that. But it's something to think about. Okay, so this, obviously throughout the book there's this whole issue of our main character, I keep forgetting she's not Rebecca, she doesn't have a name. Our main character feeling like she's not special. I thought Rebecca did this. She took the lilac as I'm doing now and put the sprigs one by one in the white vase. I'm not the first to do it. This is Rebecca's vase. This is Rebecca's lilac. She must have wandered out into the garden as I did in that floppy garden hat I had seen once at the back of a cupboard in the flower room, hidden under some old cushions, and crossed the lawn to the lilac bushes, whistling perhaps, humming a tune, calling to the dogs to follow her, carrying in her hands the scissors that I carried now. So I can understand how when your partner completely ignores you and abandons you and leaves you alone to let your brain do whatever and wonder whatever because you're not being kind and you're not giving any sort of affirmation whatsoever after marrying each other, I understand how she feels like she's second best. Like, he must be thinking about his previous wife. And it's almost like when guys tell you, oh, I've never taken a girl here before, and they've taken every single girl to that bowling alley or whatever it is. She wants to create something new with her husband, and she feels like she can't, and he's pretty much not even like a player in this scenario. Like, he's not even there. So yeah, it's just really sad. And then, so basically she's left to sort of imagine everything all the time because nothing real is happening. Like, Maxim is not doing anything with her. So all she can do is imagine. So she becomes sort of this actress. He went on staring out of the window while I held his hands. My throat felt dry and tight and my eyes were burning. Oh God, I thought, this is like two people in a play. In a moment the curtain will come down, we shall bow to the audience and go off to our dressing rooms. This can't be a real moment in the lives of Maxim and myself. Yeah, so life as drama rather than life as reality. And I totally get it. I totally get when there's not much going on in your life that you can just live in fantasies, good or bad. I must say there are a lot of references to window seats in this book, which is why I wanted to film this video in this room. They're constantly sitting on window seats. Okay. Catastrophizing, right? So this is another example of her. Something happens and she just spirals. Yeah, she's thinking, like, she hears the phone ring and she thinks it's going to be a doctor. The doctor would have rung up from some cottage hospital. You must be very brave, he would say. I am afraid you must be prepared for a great shock. And Frank would come and we would go to the hospital together. Maxim would not recognize me. I went through the whole thing as I was sitting at lunch. I could see the crowd of local people clustering around the churchyard at the funeral, and myself leaning on Frank's arm. It was so real to me that I could scarcely eat my lunch, and I kept straining my ears to hear the telephone should it ring. The scariest part where that happens is where she sort of turns into Rebecca when she's sitting at the table and goes through an entire scene in her head and is like on her face acting it out, like just doing these little expressions, and Maxim notices it. Whoa, it really gave me the chills because, you know, I at least was rooting for this character, like, please don't turn into Rebecca because I have a bad feeling about her. And I did, like, I didn't know she was going to be as bad as she ends up being, but when Mrs. Danvers said that thing about, I think she treated a horse really badly, some animal, and she was just so stubborn and so unafraid of everything. She just sounded like an awful jerk, and turned out she was even worse than that. What? I cannot read my writing. Oh yes, okay. So our main character goes from being a companion to a wife immediately, and really, I think she just wants to be alone. Sometimes, at least. She says there were pigeons somewhere in the trees above. It was very peaceful and quiet. I wondered why it was that places are so much lovelier when one is alone. How commonplace and stupid it would be if I had a friend now sitting beside me, someone I had known at school who would say, "By the way, I saw old Hilda the other day. You remember her, the one who was so good at tennis? She's married with 2 children." And the bluebells unnoticed, or beside us unnoticed, and the pigeons overhead, oh my god, overhead unheard. I did not want anyone with me, not even Maxim. If Maxim had been there, I should not be lying as I was now, chewing a piece of grass, my eyes shut. I should have been watching him, watching his eyes, his expression, wondering if he liked it, if he was bored, so on and so forth. So she gets to be herself when she's alone. Very telling. It's very telling. And again, relatable. You know, I can't say, like, I love this character because I feel like I don't know enough about her because she is so in the background. But a lot of her little neuroses, I was just like, that's me. But this part shows that maybe this is again before we know about the twist, but our main character is, when you look back, contrasted with Rebecca, she is a better person. When she goes to meet Maxim's grandmother, she thinks, "I felt rather exhausted and wondered, rather shocked at my callous thought, why old people were sometimes such a strain, worse than young children or puppies because one had to be polite." So she's shocked that she just even had this thought that might be considered rude, whereas Rebecca had no conscience whatsoever, and I read something that said that she might have been a sociopath. So there's the difference right there. You know, you have somebody blackmailing, abusing, being a total creep, and then this poor girl who just feels bad that she had a bit of a nasty thought in her head. But I love in that scene where she meets the grandmother how we get an example of how hyper aware she is, because I think like this too. Like, I can't talk to somebody without analyzing everything, and thinking all the way back to like their grandparents' existence and how they got here, you know what I mean? "It's only just turned the half hour, madam," said Nora in a special voice, bright and tearful like the nurse. I wondered if Maxim's grandmother realized that people spoke to her in this way. I wondered when they had done so for the first time, and if she had noticed then. Perhaps she had said to herself, "They think I'm getting old, how very ridiculous," and then little by little she had become accustomed to it, and now it was as though they had always done so. It was part of her background. But the young woman with the chestnut hair and the narrow waist who gave sugar to the horses, where was she? Love that image. I love that image. One of my favorite things is thinking about old people being young. Just fascinates me. That we all have a past, we all have a youth, a history. So there are some points in the book where we can see Rebecca's vanity rubbing off on the main character, and it really scared me a few times. I was like, please don't go that way, don't be like her, because I just have this bad feeling about her and I want you to be the heroine. So she gets her costume for the ball. She says, "How is it? How do I look?" I did not wait for her answer. I twisted and turned in front of the mirror. I frowned, I smiled. I felt different already, no longer hampered by my appearance. My own dull personality was submerged at last. So there's this really creepy vibe that doesn't fully come to fruition, but throughout the book you're nervous about it, where you just feel like she's going to become Rebecca. First of all, you have creepy Mrs. Danvers, like telling her to touch Rebecca's clothes and stuff, and you start to wonder, is the main character just going to try to take that place and think that that's the only way that she can be loved in this environment by this person, to become a version of that dead woman. Very scary. So thank goodness it didn't end up that way. This is just one of the toughest paragraphs, where it's after the ball, and Maxim does that weird thing where he treats her like crap because he thinks that she dressed like Rebecca on purpose, and it's like, what's going through his head? Because he doesn't think that she knows that he killed Rebecca, right? So why is he acting like such a jerk? Obviously, she just didn't know. She didn't know, so she wore the same thing that Rebecca wore. She didn't know, it was a mistake. And like, you're not giving this girl anything, you're not telling her anything. How is she supposed to know a single thing about your feelings? Whatever, he made me so mad. So after that, she was like, that's it, he doesn't love me. Maxim was not in love with me, he had never loved me. Our honeymoon in Italy had meant nothing at all to him, nor our living here together. What I had thought was love for me, for myself as a person, was not love. It was just that he was a man, and I was his wife, and was young, and he was lonely. He did not belong to me at all, he belonged to Rebecca. He still thought about Rebecca. He would never love me because of Rebecca. She was in the house still, as Mrs. Danvers had said. She was in that room in the west wing. She was in the library, in the morning room, in the gallery above the hall, even in the little flower room where her mackintosh still hung, and in the garden, and in the woods, and down in the stone cottage on the beach. Her footsteps sounded in the corridors, her scent lingered on the stairs. And it goes on and on and on. Rebecca was still Mrs. De Winter. I had no business here at all. Everybody's saying you're so very different from Rebecca. Frank saying she was the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen. This part was just so sad, because she's tried, and she's thought maybe she could fit in there, and she just has to learn her way around and deal with Mrs. Danvers and her strange ways. But then she just realizes this is completely hopeless, and I will never exist here. She's not allowed to thrive in her own identity. As an individual person, she can't thrive, because she's being pushed aside, she thinks. At least she's definitely being pushed aside by Mrs. Danvers. And in favor of this past wife. This is just my nightmare. Like, can I just say, I won't get too into personal things, but that is a nightmare for me, to marry someone and think that they're only thinking about the person that came before. It's so degrading, and I just, to not feel loved by the person that you love because they're still really tied to somebody else and always will be, that would be very, very, very hard for me. Okay, whoa, yeah, this part just took it up a notch for Mrs. Danvers. She backs the main character up to a window, and she's telling her to jump out the window. I was just like, where did that come from? Because she's horrible, but whoa. It was so upsetting, and to hear the main character's thoughts about, like, maybe she would, and she was feeling so weird and like dizzy, and this woman is like, it's not like drowning, why don't you try it, why don't you go? It's so horrible. There are a lot of evil things you can do in this world, but one of the most evil is tell somebody to end their life. I've got no sympathy whatsoever for Mrs. Danvers. She is a piece of crap. I hate her. But I'm sure her story is an interesting one. Because just the idea of being sucked in by this awful little child that you basically raised, and then moving into her married life as well, and defending her even past her death. when surely you must know, she knows her better than anyone, that she's not a genuine person. She did know that. Horrifying. Okay, one more. Okay, so after the narrator finds out that Maxim killed Rebecca, she's weirdly not upset by that. She's just happy that he says he loves her, and now they can fight this together. It was a little bit upsetting. Like, maybe you should be afraid that your husband is capable of murder, even if the person that he murdered was awful and was threatening to ruin his life, and their marriage was a sham the whole time. Murder's not really... that's not the way to go. That's not acceptable, my man. So I would be real scared if my husband confessed that to me, but she's just like, let's go for it. And she says, I was not young anymore, I was not shy, I was not afraid, I would fight for Maxim, I would lie and perjure and swear, I would blaspheme and pray. Rebecca had not won, Rebecca had lost. She's been so wrapped up in this Rebecca debacle that just the relief to know that her husband never loved that woman, and that he actually does love her, and he can come out of his weird funk where he ignores her, that is enough to push aside any fears that she should have about him being a murderer. So yeah, I need more information on why Maxim married Rebecca, because there is kind of like a throwaway line, like he was forced into it. Oh, it just happened. And it was a sham from the beginning, but then he also says he didn't know until like 5 days after their wedding or something. On their honeymoon, he found out she was a total liar and an evil person. So it's like, were you into her before you knew that? Did you really know anything about her and you were just into her? Kind of like how you picked this young woman out of this hotel and just fit her into your life because that's what you do with women. Don't have a lot of sympathy for him. Don't like him. You know, I wouldn't want to have been in his situation either, with such an awful spouse, but then he in turn becomes a pretty awful spouse, and honestly, their life, where they have to leave England because it's still too close to them, this, I guess, the fear that like he will go to jail because of it, even though they get off by going to this doctor who says Rebecca knew she was ill and so it is feasible that she killed herself. And nobody ever knows that Max shot her and then drowned her in her boat. But yeah, I guess they're afraid that that's going to come to light somehow, some way. So they're living somewhere in Europe. And it just sounds awful. Again, like, I feel like the narrator would be a lot happier if she just said goodbye, Maxim, and went off on her own adventures. Because why do you need that? I mean, you barely knew the guy in the beginning, so what do you love? Where's the deep love that is keeping you together? I think this is trauma bonding, to be honest. This is not a true love story to me. I enjoyed it, again, but I don't romanticize this relationship at all. And also, did Manderley burn to the ground? Did Mrs. Danvers burn down Manderley? Because there's these lines in the very end where at first I didn't think anything of it. And then she's like, it's like the middle of the night and they're seeing light as they drive towards Manderley. That's not the Northern Lights, he said, that's Manderley. He drove faster, much faster. The road to Manderley lay ahead. There was no moon. The sky above our heads was inky black, but the sky on the horizon was not dark at all. It was shot with crimson like a splash of blood, and the ashes blew towards us with the salt wind from the sea. I mean, that sounds pretty self-explanatory. Anyway, what did you think about this book? I loved it. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you all next time.